Welcome to the 11th episode of No Dice, a podcast series talking about female gambling addiction and stories of recovery across Scotland. I'm your host, Kat Cochrane, and having been in recovery from compulsive gambling for 4 years, I'll be sharing my own journey towards the goal of a gamble-free life. As a content warning, this episode does cover themes of addiction and gambling behaviour. Throughout the series, along with a variety of guests, I've been discussing a mixture of topics and issues which arise around gambling addiction and harm, particularly for women. And with this being the penultimate episode, it's great to share another story of recovery. Joining me as a guest on the episode is Emily, who I'm delighted to say will be sharing her own personal experience around a life beyond compulsive gambling to a place of personal strength and growth. Thanks so much for joining me in this particular episode, Emily. It's a pleasure to hear your experience and insights on this personal theme. To start us off with your journey, can you share a little bit about your gambling harm experience and where it all started for yourself?
Of course, and thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. You know, gambling for me started not really young. I remember my mum and dad putting a coupon on the Grand National. Football's always been kind of a big part of our life as a family, you know, sport, but particularly football. And, you know, I'd remember, you know, sometimes my dad coming up to me and saying, "Oh, do you want to pick some teams to win? And I'll put £1 on it for you." And I thought it was great. I thought it was fantastic. But that's all it was. It was £1 here and there, and genuinely a bit of fun. And then I moved to Dundee just before I turned 18. And, you know, I was living with 5 other students. And, you know, as soon as I turned 18, I went and bought alcohol, bought a packet of cigarettes, and I went to the bookies. Mm-hmm. And that's what gambling was for me. It was a couple of £1 a week on the football, and it was the social element of, you know, going to the pub with my pals and having a few pints and watching the results came in. And, you know, at that point, see if the coupon came in. Amazing. See if it didn't. I wasn't bothered. I just wasn't bothered. But that's how it started, you know, couple of £1 a week. And then you've got a casino. Mm. So big casino in Dundee. And first time I went to the casino, it wasn't even to gamble, it was to drink. You know, the pubs had shut, the clubs had shut. And someone said, you know, should we carry on the party? Yeah, let's carry on the party. So I went and I bought a drink, and with my change, I didn't get monetary change. I got a chip. And I thought, well, I've got it. I'll spend it. And it was £5 chip. And I played roulette for a little bit, and I won a little bit of money. Not a lot of money, but I was a student. You know, I didn't have a lot of money. I was working in a fish and chip shop, and I saw that as this could be the way to get a wee bit extra money. Mm-hmm. And honestly, from there, it just grew astronomically in a really short space of time. And I was just hooked. Just from winning in that casino that one night, that's all it took for me. And it didn't take long for me to spend all day at the casino. You know, the full day. People who worked at the casino knew who I was. They knew my name. They knew, you know, what I was doing at uni. They knew my sister's name. They knew my partner's name. You know, that they knew all these things, and I thought I was the big dog. I was like, these people know me. You know, I'd get a wee free drink, you know, every now and then, and I'm the big boss here. But it was something because I knew that I would be in all the time, and I would spend every single penny. You know, walking home from the casino at 5-6 o'clock in the morning with not a penny to my name, and walking 2.5 miles back to my flat at the time. That was normal. And then online gambling was that was the nail in the coffin. You know, I was able to do everything that I could do at the casino in the comfort of my own home without having to speak to anybody. Didn't have to get dressed. You know, it was at my fingertips, and it just fed into me wanting to be alone. I would describe myself as I was a person who had a massive ego, but really low self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And see, a lot of people outside of, compulsive gamblers maybe don't understand that. But people who are like us do. It was, you would put that face on to say, I'm grand. You want a drink, I'll buy you a drink. You want to go out tonight, I'll go out tonight. And then secretly deep down, you were like, I hate myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to do that in the comfort of my own home. And, by this point, I'd graduated university. I scraped through university because going to the casino meant I didn't go to class.
Mm-hmm.
But I graduated and I was working full time and I didn't earn a lot of money, but it was the most money that I'd ever had. And that just fueled the online gambling. It was, well, I've got this money now, but I didn't pay my council tax. Didn't pay my rent on time. It was regular for me to have nothing in the fridge. No lecky.
Mm-hmm.
The adult responsibilities that you're supposed to have. I didn't grasp that. It was all, I'm going to gamble my money and I'm going to make a lot of money. And I never made a lot of money. There were times that I did win a lot of money, but it was never going to be enough. It was never going to be enough for me to turn around and be like, you know what, I've won what I've wanted. That's me done. It was never going to be that, because money was God to me. So, I thought if I had money, that was the solution to life. Money meant people liked you. I could buy all the materialistic things that I wanted, but I was never going to buy it because that money was just never going to be enough. Yeah, I mean, I lived that life for a few years. Kind of 18 to 24 was my kind of gambling, and then it all kind of exploded when someone found out about it.
It's so interesting what you were saying there about how it started. The kind of the combination of the booze, the fags, the gambling.
Yeah.
It's like when you turn 18, it's almost like it's part of a passage of rite, isn't it? Because I remember something similar where it was a Grand National the year I turned 18. And it was like, right, I can go into the bookies. I've already been able to, get a carry out. I'm already smoking, and now I can go into it. And it was like a trio. And I wonder if it was similar to yourself. It was like things that made you feel older or made you feel like an adult. And that's what we were chasing. Because I remember my first experience that day going in the bookies for the Grand National, and I was putting it on for my mum. And I was pretending that I was like wanting to, sort of like doing it for my mum, but I couldn't wait to get in the bookies because I thought there was something behind there that I wanted a bit of action to. So it's almost as if we were already kind of knowing, like the kind of not foreseeing it, because you don't want to foresee a kind of future of like compulsive gambling, but it was already things that were like set in society that we just kind of grabbed onto. So I thought that was really interesting in your early days there.
Yeah, definitely, because gambling was everywhere, and especially being, big into football, I used to go to quite a few Dundee United matches with my pal who was a Dundee United fan. And, it was always, right, couple of pints before the game, right, who we're going to have a first goal scorer? What's the score going to be? Go to the bookies, go to the game.
It's routine, isn't it? It's baseline routine when the weekend comes or midweek games, And if you're, it's like if you do like football. And I think it's unusual for girls to like football and bet. It's not, because I've done it as well, but did you ever feel uncomfortable, or did you feel that actually bookies was a safe space for you, before you went to the casinos and it started off as the football bets?
I saw it as a safe space.
Yeah.
I think, as we kind of continue to talk, I'll probably talk quite a bit about belonging. Like I felt like I belonged in the bookies.
Yeah, I felt similar. Even though it was older men, there was no toilets.
Yeah,
or no designated female toilet.
Yeah.
It was weird that space felt not necessarily welcoming, but it was a space where I was like quite, relaxed in. I knew how to put a bet on, I knew how to put a coupon on, and not a lot of people knew how to do that at 18 or like 19, 20, whatever. So that was a space where you knew what you were doing,
Definitely. And teaching others. I don't know about you, but, I brought people along that journey with me. You know, if I wanted to go to the bookies and I was with my pals and maybe some of them, you know, I'd be, but come on, I'll show you.
Yeah.
I'll show you what you can put on. And, you know, again, the big ego,
Yeah.
put this on and it'll come in, you know, and then you'll make however much money and then that'll cover, you know, your food bill for the week or whatever. And, oh, really? Oh, yeah, right. I'll give that a go.
It's all part of being the big I am, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're gambling and you've got that ego sort of thing. Yeah.
Definitely.
So just fast forwarding a little bit to like the times when you were in the casino and you were always in the casino and it was part of your day and it was part of your university journey. Did you feel that there was like employees or the boss or the managers within the casinos were kind of taking safety checks on you then? Was that part of your journey with ever tapping your shoulder? And, you know, because I know that's a big thing now, but maybe that's came in the last few years. But then when you were sort of, you know, kind of skidding into danger, was that part of the experience?
But not for me, not personally. And I think, you know, when I first started going to the casino, you know, it was very much the gambling and the drink together. And then the longer I went, the less alcohol was involved and the more gambling there was. And, you know, I think I understand, you know, people asking about kind of safety checks and all that kind of thing. And looking back, I will always say that, you know, even though I didn't act like it at the time, I was an adult, you know, and I very much I made those decisions. Like I made my bed, you know, and had to lie in it. You know, I made those choices, and you know, I think whether someone was there, kind of, you know, looking after me from afar or not, even if they were, I wouldn't have listened to them.
Yeah,
because no one was going to tell me to, you know, you're right, you maybe want to go up. You will not tell me that. I'm here to gamble and spend my money and win your money. You know, no one else is going to tell me different. So I think, you know, from hearing kind of people newer coming in the kind of, you know, doors of GA, you know, you do hear a bit more about that, which can only be a good thing. But at the same time, I think even if there was, I don't think I would have listened to them anyway.
Yeah. Is it because you think that it was during this point or even before that you'd passed that invisible line, you know, that what we call in recovery, and I know it comes up in GA and we've spoke a lot on this, about it on the podcast series, is that invisible line that we can't always quite define the day necessarily, but there might be a little bit of a chronological period where, I'm too far gone.
I genuinely think I went past that invisible line after that first trip to the casino. Genuinely, because that's all it took for me to, you know, the £1 or £2 a week here or there in the bookies was enjoyable. That's how it started for me. And then going to the casino and winning, like I said, not a lot of money. I remember being fixated from that point onward that this was it. This was going to be my life. I was going to gamble and I was going to get the money that I felt I deserved, for no other reason apart from I had a massive ego. And you know, and that I wasn't going to have to put work in. Do you know what I mean? You know, trying to find an easy way out. But I remember that flick of the switch in my mind, honestly, after that first visit. Yeah.
I mean, I remember going into the casino in Glasgow and being like, I've got a £5. I'm going to come out with £500. And truly believing that. Like, you know, truly believing that every day. And even if I went to bed that night crying, sobbing into my pillow, knowing that I've like lost, you know, more than I can afford, I woke up the next day and was like, how can I get money to do this again? And it's like that thing that Albert Einstein's saying, it's like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting like different results. It's like, that's insanity. And that's where you get to when you're a compulsive gambler. You just keep on doing it, keep on finding ways of making money and expecting a different result. And there might be one or two like bigger wins that keep you going or keep you floating, but even if you don't get those wins, you just keep going back anyway. You know, it is insanity. So you're saying there about the day when things changed. Would you say that was like a kind of a rock bottom day, or was that still to come in your journey, so to speak?
It was still to come for me. I think it's always a good question about rock bottoms. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people who can really pinpoint it. And look, I think the day that I got caught was a rock bottom day. And when I say getting caught, you know, my my mum and dad knew that I gambled. They'd bailed me out numerous times over the years. My partner at the time, again, knew that I gambled. She probably didn't understand to the extent. There was one time in particular where it was bad, and my grandma was ill, and my grandma lived down south, and you know, I knew she wasn't going to last long. So we bought flights to go down, and I remember my granddad kind of paying me back for the flights, you know, being like, look, you're newly working, you know, I know you've not got loads of money, like I'll pay you back the money for the flights. And I was like, oh, great, thank you. And I gambled that all away. And I remember telling my partner about that, and, you know, her not understanding my previous history with gambling, because I hadn't told her. You know, I made that choice not to tell her the extent. But because of the emotions at that time, you know, she was very you're going through a tough time. You know, your grandma's going to die. You know, and really treated it as a one-off until obviously then it kind of came out more. And, you know, when I met my partner, I was in Dundee, she was in Glasgow. So we'd only see each other kind of once a month. And after a couple of years, you know, we made the decision someone's going to have to make the move. And she made the move to me in Dundee. And my responsibility was to pay for the rent. I was not paying for the rent because I was gambling. And I had, you know, kind of lied and manipulated her in a way to kind of uproot her life to come to live with me, for me to then not pay for the roof that is over our heads. And her finding out the real extent of my gambling that day was a rock bottom day. I remember the night before, I was contemplating what we call in GA step 20, which is, you know, have you ever thought about kind of self-destruction due to your gambling? That's where I was at. I was thinking, I'm better not being here. And then that was the night before, the day after, you know, getting caught by my partner and everything coming out. And, you know, she picked up the phone to my mum and dad. You know, my mum and dad knew that they weren't surprised because of the kind of bailouts that they'd given me previously. But, you know, I very vividly remember my dad saying to me, if you don't do something about this, you're going to end up in the gutter. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty low place to be, where your dad, who I know has always given me unconditional love, but probably didn't like me at the time. You know, I've always had the unconditional love from you know, my family, but I know that they've not liked me a lot of the time. So yeah, hearing your dad say you're going to end up in the gutter, literally not having a penny to your name, thinking about taking my own life because thinking that's the best option, for me is pretty rock bottom. Mm-hmm. Even though it wasn't me saying to myself or to anyone else, I need to do something about this. It took for someone to, I definitely was sick of gambling, sick of what I was doing to myself. But yes, it still really took others to really pick up on that for me to actually feel, right, yeah, I am a rock bottom, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's possible in gambling journey when we become exposed, or it comes out, or you get exposed, or you expose yourself, or you come clean, or that starts to happen. There can be like the financial rock bottom, and then there can be the emotional rock bottom, and somehow in your story there, it's as if those two worlds collided at the same time, because you were already doing the borrowing, probably robbing Peter to pay Paul, and no paying the rent, and then, you know, the emotional side of it, where your partner found out, where your parents found out, they were starting to communicate about it. Yeah, that's a horrible thing. That is an uncomfortable thing for a compulsive gambler, thinking they're talking about my situation, I don't want to deal with any of this is like so difficult. But knowing deep down that you have created all this, and then finding a way out of that in the early days. And of course, one of the things that we do sort of lean to, and that's the danger of compulsive gambling, is like, you do think about ending your life, you do think, because I've been there, you do think about like that as the escape route, but again, it's like the coward's way out because of the destruction that will be left behind. But we do go there because we've got ourselves backed into a wall where it's like, it's, you know, it's like easier to deal with that it's somehow easier to do that than deal with the conversations that we need to have with our loved ones like later on. Somehow it's just like, I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
And you're so backed up.
Because I think it's interesting what you say there about the whole emotional and financial. 100% it's both.
Yeah.
But even though I've just said there about I was contemplating taking my own life, that's not what I was worried about. What I was worried about was, how am I going to get myself out of debt?
Yeah. Yeah.
And really focusing on this is a financial problem. Even though I was thinking about killing myself, it was, how am I going to get out of the debt? That was my focus, rather than, oh my goodness, I want to end my life. That just didn't, the thought and the action was there, but actually I didn't think that was the issue. It was the money.
It was the absolute pain of thinking, how am I going to ever pay this last penny back and be back on some sort of like even keel? And that can be a dark place. Because I mean, if is it that way because you owed so much money to family or to like financial institutions, or was it just all adding up together? Was there one that was more difficult to deal with than the other, say?
The main issue at the time was because I wasn't paying rent. It was, we're not going to have a roof over our heads. I wasn't paying my council tax, and I had sheriff officers at my door. And you know what? Like, I think this shows a lot about where my head was at the time. I 100% owed my family an awful lot of money over the several years. But I didn't even think about that. I was taking out payday loan to pay off a payday loan to pay off a payday loan, and getting into that cycle. And my thought straight away was, right, I need to pay off the payday loans. I need to pay my rent. I need to pay my council tax. I didn't even think about what I owed my family. That was, and again, that really showed where my head was at, because the welfare of my family in all of this was honestly probably at the bottom of my priority list, because of where my head had been for years at that point. I put on the face, I said what I felt I needed to say to get what I needed out of my family, which was always money. I didn't want their time. I didn't want their love. I didn't want the only thing I wanted for them was money, so I could keep gambling. But yeah, that's probably something I've not reflected on in this way before, in terms of course I owe my family money, but it just never, that just never came into my mind when I got caught and thought, right, how am I going to deal with this financial issue?
Yeah, it's like the people nearest and dearest to you when you're a compulsive gambler are often the ones that we just take for granted. It's like the bank of mum, the bank of dad, the bank of your best pal, the bank of your partner. It's like they're like money trains in a way. Do you know what I mean? You keep them close and tell them what exactly, like you were saying, exactly what they want to hear from you, and most of it, 99.9% times, it's a lie, and then you end up just forgetting about the lies that you told to cover the previous lies around why you need the money, sort of thing, and you're just like on this never ending train. And I was the same. It was like it took me about 2 years into recovery to even realise the damage that I'd done to my ex-partner, to my mum, to my brother, to my best pals, to my outer, like inner circle and outer circle, because of those ripple effects that we don't see because we're only thinking about ourselves. So it's a massive thing. It's a massive thing. And it just proves, like, here we're two women talking about where our compulsive gambling harm took us, to the point where we thought about we're better off not being here for one reason or another. And that is where gambling takes us. And that's the kind of thing that we want to raise awareness around in this whole episode, in this whole series, because we're talking about life or death stuff. It's that big. So can I ask you a little bit about what entering recovery looked like for you as you were moving forward?
So ultimately, after the kind of dust had settled slightly, once kind of everything was out in the open, I was very honest in terms of, how much debt I was in, and about the whole rent situation and all of that. And my partner and I looked up Gamblers Anonymous, in Scotland, and what meetings were around. And I went. All of this kind of happened on the Saturday, and then the Monday I was at my first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. So I remember where our flat was at the time, it wasn't that far away um from the meeting place. So I was just going like, look, I'll just go and I'll rock up. And I didn't twig this at the time, but my partner went with me and waited to make sure that I went in and stayed in. Um, and I didn't twig that for a good while after. But I remember walking up to it, so it was in a church. Um, and I can see people kind of shaking hands outside and smiling. And I'm thought, well, why are these people smiling? My life is awful. Why are people smiling? And then, someone shakes my hand and asks me my name, and was this your first meeting? Yeah, yeah. And I go in, and the room's packed. It's absolutely packed. Um, and I get, kind of shown to a seat, and I can remember exactly who was sitting next to me that night, and it's a wonderful woman, um, who wasn't local to the area, but lovely older woman. She had uh, a Jesus on cross necklace, and I'm in a church, and I'm hearing the word God mentioned, and I'm thinking, shit, am I in the right place? As a gay woman, am I going to combust in here? Is this really is this the place for me? And that night, for anyone who hasn't been to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, that they all work slightly differently, but normally you'll hear a share from someone. Someone will give a share about their story, and that night it was a woman who was asked to do her share. And look, probably goes without saying there was not a lot of women in GA. I think there would have been me and 3 other women in that night in about a room of 35, 40 people. And she shared her story, and it was the first time ever that I didn't feel alone. It was, oh my goodness, someone is talking about something that I can relate to. I'm not the only one who has done some of these awful things. And just finding a bit of hope and a bit of just relating, relating someone. And I cried a lot, I cried an awful lot. And, in Gamblers Anonymous, it's kind of typical to get asked these kind of 20 questions. And you answer yes or no to them. And I answered yes to every single one, which isn't a good thing, but showed me kind of where I was and how bad things were in my life.
Yeah, I was 16 and I thought I was high, but yeah, every single one. Yeah,
it was. But again, there was something that night, and I kind of refer to it as blind faith. Like I was in a room full of strangers. I didn't know anyone. No one knew me. But I still felt comfortable enough in a short space of time to actually answer yes to some of these questions. And I mean, some of them, were, there's one question about, have you ever considered, an illegal act to fund your gambling? And I'd stolen from family members. And I literally went into that room and said, yes, I've done that in front of people who I've met and I've only known for about 10 minutes. So yeah, it was eye-opening. And I kind of knew I was in the right place. But what I will say is I went to my first meeting in GA. It was November 2016. Towards the end of November as well. And obviously Christmas is coming up, and I thought, there's not going to be any meetings on over Christmas and New Year. Everyone's got better things to do. Everyone's going to be spending time with their family, whatever. So I went to a couple of meetings, and then I ditched it for Christmas and New Year. And then January came back around, and kind of speaking to my partner who stayed with me, and said, right, I'll get to another meeting. And from then the rest is history. But yeah, very initially overwhelming, but just a really immediate sense that I was with people who understood me, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. It's weird because I had a very similar situation whereby I was out for a meal with my partner on the Sunday, and I realised I didn't have the money to pay for, and it was her birthday. It was like, right, I'm paying for this meal.
Yeah.
And then I checked my account like all compulsive gamblers do, thinking, yeah, you've got like 50 quid left. And you're like, no, I used that last night on online slots or whatever, really. And I went, I'm going to need to come clean here. And the reason I'm going to need to come clean about the whole shebang is because this is just going on for so long as to why I've not got money for X, Y, and Z when we are just going out for a nice meal. But the symbolism of it is that it was her birthday, and I promised that I would buy the meal as partners do.
Yeah.
And because I didn't have the money, it was like, why don't you have the money? And I just went, bugger it, it's going to happen. And then within 2 days, I was at my first GA meeting.
Yeah.
And it was similar, whereby I went into the room and it was, oh my God, what's going on here? But she was actually allowed to come in with me for the first meeting, and it meant that when the 20 questions were asked of me, answered 16, and that was answered more than I thought I would, so it made me realise I was in the right place. But she was hearing that for the first time around, like you say, the illegal acts, around the kind of behaviours, kind of the place that you've been in your head, even around like kind of, thoughts of taking your life and things like that. It's such a hard 20 questions to be asked, but at the same time it's the best, because then when you answer all them, you realise you're in the right place. And it kind of went from there. So it's kind of like a few parallels there. When your recovery started, did you have the support from friends and family? Did they go on that journey with you, or did you have the challenges of healing yourself and then healing with them, or was it kind of conducive altogether on your journey?
Yeah, so I think the wording is really important here. Mm-hmm. I spent my first year in GA stopping gambling, but my life got worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it got worse for a couple of different reasons. I describe myself as a compulsive gambler. If you give me a penny, it ain't going to stop at a penny. It's going to go all the way to God knows what. And with stopping gambling, I felt like I needed something else to fill the void. And for me, that turned into work. I worked an awful lot. And I got to a point where pretty much I was either at work or I was at a GA meeting. It was one of the two. And, I'd go home to my partner and she would say, how was your meeting? How was your day? And I would give her a one-word answer, fine. And what I didn't appreciate at the time was, I was starting to go through a journey of starting to, hopefully live a life, free without gambling. And was getting that support from the GA rooms, but my partner was getting nothing. Mm-hmm. My dad's very solution based, pick up the phone, how's your meetings going? How's this going? Have you thought about doing this? Every time we passed the phone to my mum just cried, very much a mummy's girl. Mm-hmm. My mum was the one who'd sometimes slip a 20 behind my dad's back, to keep me going. Younger sister who, didn't really fully understand. But ultimately I wasn't taking any of my family along the journey. It was very much, it was still all about me. It was, right, I know I've got a problem. I'm going to GA meetings. What more do you want from me? Like, I've stopped gambling. And it goes back to, us discussing that, it's not just a financial issue, but I very much thought it was just a financial issue. Mm. And it took for, my partner left me and I quit my job. I hated my job. I was working, 60, 70 hours and hated my job. But because, and again, going back to that unconditional love from my mum and dad, they said, look, if you want to pack it in, move back in with us, do that. They helped me, kind of sort out some of my debts and, put in, payment plans and all this kind of thing. And they said, come back home if you want to. And that's what happened, So I'm a year off a bit. My partner's left me. I've quit my job. I've not got a job. I'm living back with my mum and dad at 25 years old, having moved out when I was 17. I was like, life's shite. you know, life is not good, but you know, it was good. You know, I was staying away from gambling, but where I feel my recovery really started to kick in was ultimately realizing that it's not just about the financial, it's about the emotional, and bringing my family along that journey. And, you know, I remember when me and my partner were arguing, you know, she asked me, you know, what would you be open to going to couples counselling? And again, you know, the ego was like, I've stopped gambling, what more do you want? I call it was like a light bulb going off in my head, like, there's 12 steps of recovery here for a reason. You know, I would pick up, you know, there's different books in GA. You know, I'd pick it up during a meeting, read from it for about 2 minutes, put it down and forget about it. Whereas there's actually some really useful things in there. You know, they're not just there just to sit on the table, they're there to read. And then, yeah, having that flick of the switch and realizing that, yeah, there's other people involved in this journey was really the point, I think, when I started to recover.
Mm-hmm. And was it through the help of the GA that you kind of found that, or was there other services, other support services around even then? Like you're talking about 2016, 17, going into 18?
Yeah.
Was there
for me, it was just GA.
just GA? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I was going to kind of 2-3 meetings a week. You know, I feel very blessed that I had a really good group of people around me. You know, I didn't drive at the time. So I'd have people, you know, pick me up any day of the week and saying, right, I'm picking you up, we're going here. You know, we traveled the country, going to different meetings to hear different stories. And, you know, it was for me a really good mix of, you know, people to put their arm around me and say, you know, come on, like, you know, you're going to be all right. Let us kind of try and show you the way. But also some people who gave me a kick up the arse, and I needed it. You know, I really did need it, Kat, because, you know, I was so quick to go into that kind of self-pity mode. Oh, well, you know, well, I've stopped gambling, so, you know, everything should be better. Why is it not? You know, why is this happening to me? I had to accept the responsibility of my acts. That's not something I'd ever done before. The reason I was in GA, the reason that, you know, people had turned their back on me, the reason that people were keeping me at arm's length was all because of me and not because of anybody else. And just trying to be a bit more of an adult. You know, I've got bills to pay. I need to be honest. Oh my God, I could not be honest. You know, even my mum would phone me, what have you had for tea? And I'd lie about what I had for tea. You know, actually, I hadn't probably eaten that day because I spent all my money gambling. It's things like that that, again, kind of normal people were like, but that's a normal thing to do. But you know, with anybody with an addiction, you know, it's that they'll understand that it just becomes second nature. It becomes who you are. It's so quick, you don't even have to think about it. And having that experience of, you know, people in the GA rooms, you know, some people off a month, a year, some, you know, people off 10, 20, 30 years, and you still see them 2-3 times a week. And, you know, you name it, they've done it, you know, and they just want to share how they got through it to show you that, you know, when things seem hopeless and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you can't see how things are going to get better. And I've had that thought loads in GA, that actually here's some lived experience. It can get better. Stick in. Because what's the alternative? The alternative for me, if I don't stick in, is I'm going to go back gambling. And my life was bloody awful when I was gambling. So it's, you know, it's a bit of patience, you know, a bit of blind faith, whatever you want to call it, because you're really relying on a group of people who you don't know, but they know the way your mind works, and you've just got to kind of stick in with that.
I find that really interesting, because when I went into GA, it was like, I've got nothing in common with any of these people apart from the fact that we gamble. But that was like tribe right there, beyond what I could connect with my family, my partner, my friends outside of GA. So yeah, that's when you know that you're in the right place, because within a few weeks I was calling the men and women in their tribe. I just wish there was some more women in there, because that's always the thing. No matter where we are in Scotland, you're going to go into GA meetings and there might be one or two, or it's like 90% men, that's fact. But it didn't matter, because I actually became really close with some guys that were like, you know, in their early 20s.
Yeah.
Because outside with nothing in common, maybe around football, maybe around a couple of different things, but and a kind of, you know, like low level, but then it was like, when it came, it was like you look each other in the eye in a GA meeting, it's like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And that's when you know you're meant to be in those rooms, and that's what keeps going, or one of the things, because there's lots of things that keep me going back, but it's definitely one of the things that kept me going back. Can I ask you, what was the best piece of advice you received in your recovery, like round about those times? Or was there something that stood out, that even stands out now, that you could go, I want to pass that on kind of way?
There's so much. And just going back to kind of what we were discussing there, just in terms of, you know, the differences between people, because that's natural. People are different. And what I've heard quite a few times in GA rooms is, you know, people saying, don't look for the difference, look for the similarity. Because ultimately, you know, you can have a room full of 40 people who all come from different backgrounds, you know, different jobs, have completely different stories, but we've all ended in the same place. And I think that's really important. Oh, there's so many, but I think if I had to pick one, it's probably keep it simple. I know as a compulsive gambler in recovery, I love to overcomplicate things. I'm a very complicated person. You know, I can make a mountain out of a molehill very, very easily. And there's obviously not a magic wand, because if there was a magic wand, you know, everyone would be, right, that's you cured, move on. But, you know, keeping it simple, and it could be, you know, early days, it was, right, can I stay off a bet for an hour? You know, go into that kind of granularity, because all I knew was gambling. So even just to stop was for an hour, you know, was a massive achievement. Then, okay, right, take it a day at a time. You know, it's keeping it simple. And I think for me, a lot of keeping it simple as well was, I'd call it self-sabotage. Like, see if anything was going well in my life, I was like, I need to blow it up, because all I was used to was carnage, was just chaos. So all I was used to, you know, it was, you know, scrimping by at the, you know, last second to pay off a debt, or to get my rent in, or you know, I had no more kind of overdraft in my lecky, so leave right to the very second to get, you know, like a couple of quid on, you know, just to it was always that chaos. And I think realizing that, you know, I don't have to, my worst critic is me. You know, the person who is going to put me down the most and make my life the hardest is me. And realizing that, and trying to remove some of that, and accept that I'm not a bad person, I've just done bad things. I truly believe that of every single person, you know, who feels that they are a compulsive gambler, that they're not bad people, they've just done bad things. And yeah, just, yeah, loads there. Sorry.
No, not at all, because there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And that, you know, because I think when you enter GA rooms, because there's a lot of people there with a lot of experience, they want to throw all that advice that they've learned at you, and it's like, it can be bombarding. So then you take time to kind of like pick the bits that are relevant to you. So then years later, when you get asked that question, what was the best bit of advice, you're like, hold on a minute, I need to really think of it, because there's so much, and then there's ones that stand out, and there's ones that have been irrelevant, or there's ones that, you know, are relevant to other people that you'll just hold as something that you can pass on. So yeah, that was a great answer.
But what's the best bit of advice you've got?
I think it was to be kind. I think it was to be kind, along the lines of, it was, you know, because I would always be like, I don't want to put this down to addiction and just call it addiction, so that I could make that a get out clause. And it took me a while to kind of realize that it was an addiction, because I just actually early on in my recovery took on too much like personal responsibility of like, no, this isn't an addiction and it's all my doing. And that sort of like set me back in my recovery a little bit because I wasn't kind enough to myself. So it was always just all this like, I need to get to every GA meeting going. I need to like do X, Y, and Z to prove to others that I'm in recovery and this is meaningful and this is genuine. When really I was just going at like 100 miles an hour the other way, is as if I'd found recovery addictive in some, but not for the right reasons. So I had to like, it took about 8 months of going to GA, and not because of the GA meetings or whatever, but because I was kidding myself on. And I had to step away from GA because one, I was going there and doing the big fatal no thing of saying that I wasn't gambling when I was, and I always feel really, really bad even to this day about doing that, but realising that I needed some other kind of support. And that's what kind of led me to go into residential support with Gordon Moody for 6 weeks, where I was able to be in the rooms one-to-one with a therapist, just talking about how my recovery, like I hadn't started my recovery off on the right foot because I hadn't seen it as an addiction, and then able to step back and accept that. And then I felt my recovery started in earnest. But it just goes to show that, it's like it can be 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It can be 40 steps forward and 600 steps back. Recovery isn't just about staying off a bet. It's like getting yourself put back together again in some way that you've done damage to yourself. And addiction and compulsive gambling, and also trying to mend the relationships around you if they can be mended. Not always, but if they can.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there was, like, I hate that word hobby. It just sounds like something, like you do at school, like crafts and design or something like that. But, let's call it passion or something, Did you find a passion that you could term as being like a bigger high than gambling, and you've been able to move forward and that's been part of your life?
Yeah, I think describing that high is interesting, because I think what I've tried to search for more in recovery is not the high, but for the balance and for a bit of peace. I feel like the older I'm getting and the longer I've been in GA, the more I talk about peace, because, and I think you kind of described it a little bit earlier in terms of, I was always the highest of the highs or the lowest of the lows, and there was no in between. And I think trying to get a bit of balance and a bit of peace means that I can obviously still enjoy things, but I'm not kind of getting to those extreme emotions where I feel like I have to really bring myself down or really pick myself back up. I still have bad days. I still have really bad days. And I've had some wonderful, amazing days in recovery. But I think maybe not hobbies, but I think my priorities have changed in kind of being in GA and being in recovery. My family were the bottom of that priority list, and spending time with family now is a must, is a need. I want to spend time with my parents, with my sister, with my partner, now wife, with her family and we're aunties, that's a priority, and friends as well. And some of my friends know, about me being a compulsive gambler, being in GA, some don't. But just spending time with them and just feeling a joy for seeing people do well, because I hated seeing people do well, because I always wanted what they had. I was seeing people, my age buy houses and get married and have nice cars and go on holidays. And I was like, I want that. Why have I not got that? I didn't have that because I gambled, which, on the face of it is so simple, but I just could not grasp that. But I think probably more than anything, I feel like I've really found who I am as a person. I did not know who I was when I came into GA. I know that I loved a bet and I would do anything for a bet. And that's what life was. Whereas now, and I know I spoke previously about working too much. I still probably work too much, but I love my job. I have got a career that I always wanted but never had, and again couldn't understand it. Didn't have it because I was gambling. I'm really proud of. I'm a proud gay woman. I have a passion for that. In terms of talking about it to anyone who will listen. Doing. I did a lot. For obviously, especially for Pride Month at work, and that's really important to me. Being a woman in general is important to me, and especially in GA, because I've had a battle with myself over it for quite a while, because when I'm a woman coming into GA, I don't want to be treated any differently. Mm-hmm. And I'm very fortunate that the majority of the time I don't feel like I do. I should have the same opportunity to recover in a GA room than anybody should, regardless of my gender or my sexual orientation or that kind of thing. And anyone who knows me, especially in the fellowship, knows that I am passionate about speaking up for women in the meetings, because I can understand why it can be hard. I've regularly been the only woman in a room. It's normal to have two or three in a room full of 40, 50. Yeah, maybe not so much a hobby, but just a really kind of clear understanding as to who I am and liking who I am, which is really important, because I spoke before about, having that really low self-esteem. I actually like myself a bit today, and that's taken a long time. I mean, a long time. But I like who I am, and I'm passionate about things that are important, not gambling anymore. I'm passionate about recovery. I'm passionate about people having the equal opportunity to recovery. I'm passionate about my work. I'm passionate about being an auntie. My partner and I, we fostered for a little while as well. So rewarding. And the thought of me looking after anybody else, was alien to me, because the only person that mattered was me. And it's not like that today. I would say my wife and I are quite big foodies. We still love football. I had to have a break from football for a while. I genuinely did, because, I would, every Saturday, 3:00, Gillette Soccer was on the telly. That was my weekend, watching football and seeing if my bets came in. But now I get to, enjoy it at just a bit more of a purer level. We follow, quite a low junior team, and we'll follow them across the country. And it's just such a community feel. You pay a tenner to go in, and sometimes there could be raffles and these kind of things, which you just stay away from. But everyone's dead respectful of it. And some of the best football I've seen in my life has been with these, lower teams who the guys do a 9 till 5, and then they put 110% in on the pitch.
And they often put their heads where other professional footballers don't
Definitely.
put their feet.
Definitely.
That's it. Yeah. I think the best way to rephrase that is probably, if I'm going to use that horrible word hobby or passion, it's just like revelations and learnings, or like the hobby of life. It's like just building that up and getting back on track. Oh, that's really, really cool.
Because I genuinely feel I have grown up in GA. Mm-hmm. I came in when I was 24. I'm not 24 anymore. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of, kind of what people would see as kind of big life events in GA, and I wouldn't have done any of them without it. My partner who left me is now my wife. I got married in GA, bought a house in GA. Like, what? Mm-hmm. Like, no chance. Are you joking? There was no way I was going to get a mortgage. Absolutely no way. And then again, the power of hearing other people talk about it, who again have been in that crippling debt, didn't know how they were going to pay it off. And then they're talking about, well, actually, I might be able to do this. And listening to how they navigated that, and what processes they went through, and who they spoke to, and all that kind of thing, and learning from that, and again seeing the hope that, oh my God, you can rebuild relationships, you can do these things that just seem a million miles away.
Yeah. And do you celebrate like pins every year as a symbolism of your recovery?
Yeah.
Is that something that you do in your, because I know it happens in some meetings and not others, but
yeah. So my mum, dad and my sister have been at every single one of my pins.
Amazing. Yeah. How many pins have you got?
I am 8.
8, that's fantastic. Yeah.
So day at a time, I'll be 9 in November. But yeah, it's just, and it's weird. It's one of those where it feels like it's been the longest time, but also feels like it's been the shortest time. If that makes sense.
Yeah. But time can screw with your mind a little bit around recovery and life going by and what you've achieved and what you're still to achieve. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's, and it's definitely, a celebration of, just what life is today. And, I do always credit that, to GA, which for me is right. But at the same time, you got to put a bit of work in. And sometimes it's really bloody hard. But, again, if it was easy, there wouldn't be people like you and me. It would be, well, gambling's not an issue, it's, any addiction's not an issue, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from what you've told me today, Emily, it's incredible, because if somebody had said you'd be at this point in your life, like that night or that day you went in for your first meeting, you would not have believed it. I'm the same. Like when I went into my first meeting, similar to yourself, I didn't particularly like myself. There was things I liked about myself, but I didn't like myself at the core, and that was something that you really need to sort of work on, and you don't want to accept that either.
Yeah.
But the things that I've moved forward with, like creatively, the things that I've been able to shed from my life, I think sometimes it's the shedding of skin, shedding of friendships, shedding of things that maybe you put around yourself to make you feel good. And gambling was maybe one of them. I know it was for me. So clearly all the things that you have going on in your life is what keeps you in recovery now and keeps you propped up and keeps that willpower bank going, kind of thing. So I'll finish on this last question, and I think it's quite a biggie and a goodie, is a gamble-free life possible for even the most compulsive of gamblers? Now, you can put yourself in that category because like clearly with your journey you would yourself. So is it possible?
100%.
Brilliant.
Yeah, yes, definitely. It's you can't sugarcoat it. It's not easy.
Yeah.
No matter kind of what route of help or support you go down, or even if you don't access anything and you want to try and kind of do it yourself, whatever route you go to, it's not going to be easy. But it can, I personally feel I don't feel like my life has got better. I feel like I've got a new life because it's so different to the life that I led when I was gambling. And I think GA kind of sum it up in quite a simple way with one of its many sayings. And, it's the only requirement for membership for GA is a desire to stop gambling. If you've got a desire, you can do it. There was a point where I probably could have come into GA a lot earlier than I did. Would I have stuck around for as long as I have now? Probably not, because I didn't want it. I didn't want to stop. I wanted to continue on gambling. That's what I wanted to do. And even though I got caught, I made a decision that I didn't want to gamble anymore. And I needed the support to be able to do that. So yes, of course it is. It has to be. And, without the many people kind of before us who have, figured it out along the way. And, from a GA perspective, the GA books are written by people way back when who had a gambling problem and need to do something. They had to make everything up. So if they can,
they're the pioneers,
they're the pioneers, exactly. If they had the grit and the determination and the willingness to try and do something obviously initially for themselves, but then pass it on, then anyone's got a chance if you want it.
Yeah, it goes back to what you say, keep it simple. Keep it simple. If you are out there and you're struggling with compulsive gambling, if you cannot keep away from gambling for 10 minutes, it's like Emily was saying, if you can try and get to 10 minutes, try and get to 20 minutes, try and get to half an hour, keep it simple, and doing that a little bit more every day of your life and moving forward. And that goes back to that peace of mind. So always remember, that was one of the biggest bits of advice I was given, being able to go home at night, after whatever you've done in your day, and not gambled and lay your head on your pillow and go, I've got peace of mind and it's damn good and that feels good. And then I remember the first time I had a bit of a spell away from gambling, which was like, I can't remember if it was like 10 days, but back in the early days, that was like a huge amount. I was able to do maybe 2 or 3 different GA meetings and go, I've stayed off a bet for 3 meetings in a row. It felt massive. And then going home that night and going, this is what peace of mind is like, you know, and I want to keep this. And that was enough to keep me going. So that was one of the best bits of advice I ever had.
Because I don't know about you, but I sleep like a baby today.
Yep.
I sleep like a baby today.
And I bet I always say that. Do you always say that? I always say that.
It's so easy done.
I bet you do.
I know, it's so easy done. But and yeah, I think, you know, obviously I'm in GA, you've got a different route, but you know, I really hope that everyone feels that they're able to celebrate those little wins.
Yeah.
You know, because I truly believe, you know, if I could have had an absolute shocker of a day, and ultimately, if I've not gambled that day, it's still a good day.
Still a good day.
Still a good day.
How many years on? Yeah. Could be 30 years on. Today, no bets have been laid.
Yeah.
And that is still as important as what it was every day since and in between.
And should still be celebrated.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope you celebrate you as well.
Yeah, I do in different ways. I kind of celebrate through, like, for example, if I write a poem, I call myself a poet, and I didn't know it. So I'll write a poem that I'm chuffed about, and I'm like that feeling, like talking about highs earlier. I try not. I'm similar. It's more about balance rather than extreme highs and extreme lows. But if I write a poem that is as close, or it's not as close, it's 10 times better than any bet that I could ever lay, or winning £1 million from a £1 bet. Like, that is something that's just like a natural high. Because at the end of the day, gambling, it doesn't take talent. It just takes like something that's very untalented, especially if you're doing like slots or roulette, or you think, in fact, I used to think I've got roulette like down. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? There's all these different strategies. It's the most untalented thing that I've ever spent time on, if that makes sense. So obviously, to write any kind of creative thing like a poem, I'm like, okay, that takes a little ounce of talent. I'm cool with that. So if I'm able to complete that, and then it's maybe accepted in a competition, or like it gets published, then that's the biggest feeling that I can get. And that's what I hold close to myself as a little piece of treasure. Do remind myself that is better than any gamble. That is better than any bet, better than any win. So yeah, I keep that. That's what I think about when I lay my head in the pillow. Not every night, but once, when, you know, now and again when I'm needing a wee jolt sort of thing, you know. So I said, thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your journey, experience and insights, and helping us break down some of the misconceptions about women and compulsive gambling. I'm 100% sure your story of recovery will be an inspiration to many listeners. And on our next episode, which is the final of No Dice, we'll be talking about the big question of whether gamble-free life is truly possible, and what we can learn from the power of sharing our stories. So thank you so much for listening, and catch you next time on No Dice, a 12-episode series discussing female gambling addiction and women's recoveries across Scotland. Thank you.